Jon Wilner, the Wilner Hotline, joins us on 365 Sports. And Paul Catalina, Craig's back on Monday. I'm David Smoke. And John, thanks for your time. Sorry we're running late. Paul, and a clock when it comes to staying on time is a bad deal. It's always very, very belligerent when it comes to that. So thanks for your time. I saw your hotline and some of the notes, etc. Was there one bullet point that said door closed on Washington State, Oregon State, Big 12? Was that still a thing?
Not a thing in terms of, as far as I know. I've talked to a few people who said the Big 12 is simply not interested in adding the two schools, and that makes sense because they've had a chance to do it 12 months ago and didn't. I don't think it makes sense for the Big 12 or frankly, for ESPN or Fox. What I do think may be happening, and I'm pretty sure is happening, is there's a lot of talk about scheduling, alliances, agreements. Teams are looking for quality non-conference games. Washington State and Oregon State would provide that for the Big 12 and for the ACC. I mean, my thought is at this point, the most likely path for Washington State and Oregon State to get into Power Conference is going to be if the ACC loses Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina, but still is able to stay together. And I'm not sure how that would work. But if they do stay together, they would be looking for more schools to bulk up. Then Washington State and Oregon State would make some sense.
And then provide travel partners for the teams on the West Coast and make that a lot easier. So do they have to hope for only a little bit of chaos then, right,
That's
John?
Right. Yeah, like not a full rupture of the ACC, like a partial. But I don't know how that's going to happen because if North Carolina, if Florida State and Clemson leave, North Carolina's going to go. I mean, they're more coveted by the SEC and the Big Ten than either Clemson or Florida State. Then if all three leave, what is left is a much depleted entity, and I'm sure ESPN would either want to completely rip up the agreement or overhaul the grant of rights and media deals. So I don't know that, would they stay together with Cal and Stanford, or would the remaining schools just try to circle the wagons and create a true Atlantic Seaboard conference? And in that case, Stanford and Cal may have to go back out west and join a rebuilt Pac-12 with the Cougars and Beavers.
Do you think when that date with Colorado, Arizona, Utah, and Arizona State came and went, what do you think George Kliavkoff was thinking that day when that official first day hit?
You mean last summer when the conference blew apart?
No, I'm talking about when the official day was, I think, like Friday. When
Yeah, August 2nd was the day that the four schools joined the Big 12. What do I think he was thinking? I don't know. He's hunting and fishing and enjoying all the money that the Pac-12 presidents are paying him. So he may not have given it much thought at all. Maybe a tiny bit of regret. I mean, my understanding is, and I've heard this from a bunch of people who have talked to him in the last year, is that he feels like he did his job. He did everything right, and it was the school's decisions not to take the deal that he put in front of them. So he has not shown it. My understanding is he has not shown any degree of accountability for what happened in the conference, and that tells you a lot about him.
I think back, and John, you were there when he had the press conferences. Is really the only time we've seen him in the last couple of years. What was going through your head when he was making those definitive, everything's going to be great. We've got a great deal, and you've got AD storming out the door when he says those things.
Yeah, he did a lot of talking. A lot of it just kind of roll your eyes about, he said something at a Pac-12 basketball event where in a couple of years the Pac-12 was going to catch the Big Ten in revenue. So there was a lot of brass talk from him that you just kind of had to roll your eyes about. Some of the things he said I thought had some relevance, but I kind of watched the whole thing with a little bit of skepticism. I always thought that it was going to be a close call as to whether the conference stayed together, but ultimately the university presidents wouldn't have the guts to blow it up because it meant so much to their schools. And university presidents are inherently an incredibly conservative group, right? So that was always what it got down to me was, would they really blow it up? Would the presidents really do that? Or would they just take the conservative, easy way out? And certainly they ended up really not having a choice when it got to it after 13 months of no deal.
Do you think that anybody that has gone with the conference blowing up that happened, but is anyone that has gone other than Washington State and Oregon State, do they have any regrets whatsoever?
Oh, I think that you will find a ton of people on every one of those 10 campuses that have regrets. Nobody wanted this to happen. USC is in a little bit of a different position, right? Because they were like the spark and they were very frustrated with how things were going. But certainly of the 8 schools that left last summer, that announced their departures last summer, none of them wanted it to happen. So, I mean, I've talked to ADs from almost every one of those schools and other folks, and they are all sad about the Pac-12, and they all wanted the thing to hold together. And they all felt like they got to the point where they didn't have a choice. They had to do what was best for their school and take the lifeboats. But I think that there are people everywhere who are sad about it, for sure.
Jon, as you look around outside of Oregon and Utah, which team is most likely to win their new conference?
Certainly, yeah, Oregon and Utah. To me, those are the clear options. I think Arizona's going to be good, but I just don't see them as being quite good enough to win what should be a very balanced, high-quality Big 12. And, Washington's got 21 new starters, and I don't see how they're going to, compete with the Buckeyes and the Ducks. And USC, are they going to play defense? I don't know. We'll keep waiting to see if Lincoln Riley's going to produce a decent defense. And even if their defense is a little better this year, their offense is going to be worse without Caleb Williams. So I don't see, I think Oregon's right there with the Buckeyes, and I think Utah is the favorite in the Big 12, which my sense on social media is that's not going over very well with Big 12 fans. They kind of they're looking at Utah like, you haven't proven anything in our conference, and here you are talking brash. But I do like the Utes, assuming that they do not get hit with the same level of injuries that happened last season.
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of teams in the Big 12 with Kansas and Jalen Daniels and others that, it's like anything else. You got to keep them upright. You got to keep them healthy, but that's hard to do.
You do have to keep them healthy, and depth is becoming more and more important, especially when you factor in all the potential for postseason games, how you're going to play more in the playoffs. Depth is critical, and when you have a conference as balanced as the Big 12, you're not going to get very many easy games where you can get by with your second teamers in key positions. So to me, that's a big issue. The other thing that I don't think gets talked about enough, both in the in all four of the power conferences, is the schedule rotation and who you miss and who you play. Mm-hmm. Because if you're in the Big 12 and you are missing, you don't play, say, both Kansas schools, well, that's an advantage to you, and there's a lot of, if you go through the schedules, there's a pretty big spread in terms of who gets the right misses and who gets the wrong misses. I think that's going to end up having a lot to do with who wins the conference. And
that's been my, not criticism, but I guess the part that I regret is that the Big 12, of course, had at one point 10 teams. They're very competitive, had alpha dogs and logos and all that, blue bloods, but everybody played everybody. You knew at the end of 9 games that everybody played the same teams, and now that's just no way we're going to see that again. No, it's going to, it's 16 and you play 9, so you're missing 7. I mean, the Big Ten's even worse. You're missing 8, right? And figuring out the tiebreakers, not only for the conference championship game, but also, for the playoff at large selections. Mm-hmm. Tiebreakers in conferences is going to be very complicated. It is a whole
a new world in a lot of respects, and just the structure of these conferences is one of the biggest.
We had Ryan Abraham, who covers USC, on with us yesterday.
Uh-huh.
When USC hired Lincoln Riley, and of course there was the most likely knew that Caleb Williams would come along, and he was the Heisman winner, etc. But when they hired him, did they ever think that a year or two into that they would be going, my God, we didn't hire him for this, because they're kind of a question mark?
I think what happened to Lincoln Riley is the expectations and the reality were flipped. You know, if they had gone, what were they last year? 8-5. If they had gone 8-5 in his first year, and then what was it, 12-2?
Mm-hmm.
I think they'd be thrilled. But because they were so good in his first year when it wasn't really expected, that has flipped the expectations, and I think that's got USC fans kind of grumbling a little bit. So, but if you had, said, all right, he's going to win a total of 20 games in his first 2 years, it's like, well, that's great. It's just the order that it's happened. And then now they're entering the Big Ten coming off of the disappointing season. I think that's why USC fans are a little worried and a little unhappy. Of course, they are almost always unhappy, so you got to factor that in.
They're spoiled, is what you're saying, John. Right? They're a little entitled.
But when you win, what is it, 7 national titles, 8 national titles, you're spoiled.
No,
that's the same thing with Ohio State and those other schools.
I've actually brought this up, and we all have discussed this before, with the new college football with 12 teams in the playoff, and because of the even though I say congested because of the conferences with new teams, but at the same time, not everybody's going to play everybody. But I think that some schools, although it's going to be difficult, are entitled, spoiled, or whatever. They're going to have to get used to the possibility that 8-4, 9-3 is more of the norm rather than the 12-0, 11-1.
You probably so, with the way the conferences are structured, because you're going to play more high quality games in theory. The other thing, though, is the bar for success is a little bit lower now.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
For those schools, for the Ohio States and USCs and Oklahomas and Bamas, right, getting into the 14 playoff was the measuring stick. Now you've got 7 at-large spots. So it's going to be easier to get in because teams are going to get in with 2 or 3 losses. But at the same time, if you don't get in, then the head coach at those blue blood programs is going to be under even more heat. It's like, well, why couldn't you get in? There's 7 at-large spots. All you got to do is go 10-2, and you couldn't even do that. So it could end up getting coaches fired at the big schools a lot quicker.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that. And we got to let a couple of 2 or 3 years go by. Of course, they're already talking about expanding it from 12, and they haven't even done it yet, which is...
Well, that's college football for you, right?
Yeah.
A little bit leaderless and doesn't make any sense. And I'm of the belief, and I have no, basis for this other than just my observations, but I don't even think they're going to bother with going to 14 teams. I think it's going to be such a wild success that they're going to just go straight to 16.
Wow. Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah. Let's complain about it before we even go through it, or let's get excited. Can we at least experience it first? And John, I've been around for a while, and I think there are teams. What would be fun is to go back to the history of college football when you had an AP or UPI winner, and that was it. The bowl games were assigned to various conferences. Independents, of course, had a chance to play like Notre Dame, et cetera, in other games too, but that was it. And then there was the BCS because of 97, Nebraska, Michigan. And how many teams back in the 60s or 70s and 80s and maybe 90s would have won an extra 2 or 3 national titles if they would have had a chance to not just have a one-game bowl game and get upset or knocked out?
Oh, absolutely. You get some really good teams in that Blue Bonnet Bowl or whatever it was. No, I agree. It's very college football to wait so long to implement a playoff. I mean, basically kicking and screaming until they get the playoff installed, and then it's such a huge success. After just 10 years, it's like, well, let's expand it already. We should have just expanded it initially. The first playoff should have been at least 8 teams, but because college sports only moves incrementally. They just didn't have the willpower to force an 8 or 12 team playoff immediately.
All the things you and I have seen along the way, these youngins like Paul, he has no idea what we used to be like.
I'm not that
Paul,
young.
Paul, there used to be a time where players would only play for one school.
I remember. I'm 44. I'm not that young. I mean,
Yeah, you're right on the edge.
I remember the Reagan administration and the end of it.
There you go.
I mean,
just wait until somebody sues the NCAA on the eligibility clock, and you're going to see kids playing for 7-8 years.
Well, they do in Miami. There's a 9-year tight end or whatever.
The thing about that, John, and I think there's like teams that think like, oh, that'll be great. We'll have a 27-year-old tight end. Like outside of the Chris Winkies of the world, that's not really that good of a thing. Like if you're already at that point and you're not in the pros, you're probably not going to help a team win a national title because they're playing with NFL players that the NFL wants right now.
Yeah, the quarterbacks.
Good call on Chris Winkie, though.
Yeah, no, it is. Well, he's an FSU guy, and he's a homer, and we had to mention them at least once in every show. But no, it was the quarterbacks that would get drafted usually by baseball teams. John David Booty, or in this case, Winkie or others, they'd get drafted
Quincy
by
Carter.
baseball teams, and then they would, after 2 or 3 years of trying to play the majors or minors, it didn't work out. They'd come play in college football. John, great stuff as always. And I want to reiterate to this. You're going to cover the Big 12 with the Wilner Hotline, but you're also going to still be right there with Washington State, Oregon State, whatever else, and we look forward to that, right?
Yeah, that for sure. In fact, I got an article I published this morning that looked at the Ernst & Young assessment of Arizona's athletic department, and it includes a whole bunch of data on the other Big 12 schools. And so I published something that looks at which are the most efficient and inefficient Big 12 schools with their money, because that is going to be the name of the game going forward, right? When you got to shell out $20 to $25 million a year in revenue sharing, it puts even more emphasis on being efficient. And I thought the Ernst & Young report was very, very instructive.
Very good, Denis. That'll be a great read if you have it. Again, it's Jon Wilner, the Wilner Hotline. One of the other things, I know we got to go, and I'm keeping you longer, and we were late because Paul's timing, is that, like, for example, now, not only the 20 to 25 million revenue sharing, but the staffs in college football with NIL, et cetera, are going to grow. Like general managers, and then they're going to have a staff below them. And that's something else that adds to how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, and also the increases in scholarships, right? I mean, college football is going from 85 to 105. You don't necessarily have to have 105 guys on scholarship, but you can. And so, yeah, I mean, total expenditures probably will end up when the House settlement is totally done and it basically takes root. Expenditures are going to go up by 25 to 30 million per school. And where's that money going to come from? I mean, everybody's looking at uniform patches as one way to get revenue, but you got to be creative.
Thank you, John. Great segment. Thanks for your time. Jon Wilner, the Wilner Hotline, with us on 365 Sports.